On April 28th at 5 p.m., there was a ceremony at Saigon's Independence Palace, a final attempt to stave off disaster. A retired general, Dung Van Minh, was sworn in as South Vietnam's president. The hope was that Minh would be able to negotiate with the communists.
It was the only card we had to play, and the alternative was ghastly. Nobody wanted to think about that, so we placed incredible trust and confidence in the idea that Minh could make a difference.
I was willing to make the effort, and we made some maneuvers, which I frankly don't remember exactly now, with the Soviets to see whether they could create some sort of interim government.
We had on the sidelines Henry Kissinger tweaking the North Vietnamese through the Soviets, saying, do we hear any indication that there might be a negotiated settlement in the works? Is there any possibility of an orderly evacuation? And the Soviets apparently sent back and said, well, perhaps. That was not apparent on the ground. It was not apparent from the way the North Vietnamese were positioning themselves.
In the forests outside the city, the North Vietnamese were thinking only of victory.
Phía bên kia nếu có những người cao cấp nào đó mà nghĩ rằng có thể có những cái giải pháp chính trị thì đó chỉ là một cái ảo mộng, mà một cái mong mỏi cuối cùng trước khi là bị chết. Thế thôi, cho nên do đó cho nên chắc chắn là cả miền Bắc, cả miền Nam, cả quân đội chúng tôi đều không nghĩ tới một cái giải pháp chính trị nữa, mà chỉ nghĩ tới cái lúc đó là thắng lợi toàn bộ, thắng lợi hoàn toàn.
As newly installed President Minh left his palace, a young fighter pilot was preparing for takeoff from behind communist lines. 3 weeks earlier, Nguyen Thanh Trung, who had been trained in Texas, had defected from South Vietnam's Air Force and flown his plane into a communist-held airbase. He began teaching North Vietnamese pilots how to fly captured American-built aircraft left behind by the retreating Southern Army. Flying A-37 bombers, their first target would be Saigon's Tan Son Nhut Airport.
We think that when we bomb the Tan Son Nhut, the American will think that Tan Son Nhut is not safe now, and we want to give them a signal that let's go, hurry. Let's go. Do not stay anymore. You are not safe now. If you still live here, you cannot save your people. We took up at 5 o'clock, and these pilots, they don't know where Saigon is. From take-off time until we get to this region, nobody talking in the radio. They just follow me. I got to Saigon, and you know, at that time, every when Saigon is raining, except Tan Son Nhut area, not raining.
Some A-37 jets came roaring over, and I looked up and noticed them, and everybody kind of cast their eyes up, but then we figured, well, you know, the North Vietnamese don't have an Air Force, they're ours.
We hear in the radio voice, the American voice asked us, where and what squadron you come from? What you doing now?
And all of a sudden, huge explosions right across the street on the flight line of Tan Son Nhut erupted with big black clouds of smoke, and the detonations were palpable. Things vibrated, and this immediately caused people to begin to panic.
We have ordered from the top that we only bomb the parking base, not runway. We want to leave the runways still safe for American. If they want to go, they can go.
They were giving us a message that the time had come. We'd better pack up and leave, and fast.
The bombing of the airfield, in effect, undercut whatever massive evacuation we desired. We were able to do some at great hazard, at great challenge to our fixed-wing aircraft who had to come into an airport that was literally devastated.
We had the enormous handicap that there was a congressional law that had been passed in 1973 forbidding military action in, over, near, or whatever, Vietnam. So all we could do is to bluff, which we did.
In the early hours of the morning, the Communist High Command ordered an artillery attack on the defense attaché's compound.
My wife and I were blown out of bed by a rocket at about 4 o'clock in the morning. It knocked all the lights out in our quarters. We got up, got dressed, went over to the headquarters where we had a underground operations center.
The phone rang, and it was reported to me that there had been a rocket attack out at Tan Son Nhut, both on the airstrip and on the defense attaché compound, and in that rocket attack, 2 Marine embassy guards out there, Corporals McMahon and Judd, had been killed by a direct hit.
Other rockets had slammed into the processing center over at the swimming pool, and that rousted me in a hurry, and I then arranged for some medics, Marine medics, who were in the mortar shell out front to get themselves over to the gymnasium where they said they had casualties.
But any chance of using the runways was wrecked by the people who might have benefited, South Vietnamese pilots rushing to escape to neutral territory.
As dawn broke, the South Vietnamese Air Force decided to scramble. And so as they left, many of them headed for Thailand, they just jettisoned their ordnance, their bombs, that sort of thing. And so there was no way that anybody could use the runways.
In the Philippines, a fleet of U.S. transport aircraft was waiting for the airport to reopen. If it remained closed, it would end all chances of a massive evacuation of South Vietnamese from Saigon.
I did advise the ambassador that there was no way that we were going to be able to go out by fixed wing. And the ambassador said, well, I would like to come out and see that.
The American ambassador to South Vietnam was Graham Martin, who died in 1990.
It was very difficult to get out there to Tan Son Nhut because the crowds were really dense around the gates. And it was remarkable that he got in. He came into the command post where I was, and again, we talked about the situation a little bit more, and he said, well, he'd like to go down to the flight line and see it himself. So he did. And this was a pretty dangerous exercise, actually, because the rockets were coming in intermittently. It wasn't a heavy bombardment, but it was dangerous. And then he came back, and he said, he confirmed, yes, that you're right. We better not try any more fixed wing. It's closed down. So he asked me if he could, if we had a phone that he could call Washington. I showed him I had the only secure line back to Washington in my intelligence command post.
That was about 10:30 or thereabouts, 10:40, and then the decision was made to go for the helicopter lift in the final evacuation.
The President has ordered the evacuation of the remaining Americans from Vietnam. The military situation around Saigon, particularly at the airport, has deteriorated to such an extent that this measure has become necessary to ensure their safety. This operation is being carried out by U.S. military helicopters and is being protected by a security force of U.S. Marines and tactical aircraft. The evacuees will be taken temporarily to carriers offshore before being moved onward to the United States.
For 3 weeks, warships from the 7th Fleet had been deployed in the South China Sea. Stationed aboard were U.S. Marines with helicopters standing by in case they were needed.
I fixed that time in my mind as about 11:45, and I got the message at that time. This decision apparently had been made more than an hour before, and I said, where has this message been?
There was some confusion as to the time that we had said the helicopter lift starts at whatever hour we had said. And somebody computed it on Greenwich Mean Time, and somebody else computed it on some other time. And so we found that nothing had been done for about 2 or 3 hours. And so we stood everything down and started it again on an unambiguous departure time.
With the evacuation on hold for more than 3 hours, the only South Vietnamese who managed to reach the fleet were those who made it on their own. During the delay, the North Vietnamese Army attacked the outer defenses of Saigon.
Chúng tôi còn có một cái suy nghĩ trong kế hoạch là làm thế nào đánh vào một cái thành phố lớn có hàng 4-5 triệu dân như thế, và một cái thành phố có nhiều nhà cửa, nhiều công sự, thì làm thế nào cái cách đánh làm sao mà giữ trọn vẹn về cho mình. Bởi vì chúng tôi đã chắc thắng thì chúng tôi muốn rằng là tất cả cái đó là về chúng tôi mà còn nguyên vẹn.
The din was terrible. People were already in the streets. And I got in my car and made my way to the U.S. Embassy, and I went to the back wall, and there were many, many people trying to get over the back wall. And I had to elbow my way through them, never looking at their faces, because I knew this was the day. It was the day the communists had predicted they would move on Saigon, and that's what they were doing. And I elbowed my way into the embassy through one of the entrances, and the Marines were already pushing people off of the walls.
Hordes of people were gathering. They had been coming to get processed, and now they were coming with their luggage and started to panic, and we got very serious about where we were going to set up the machine guns. We put sodium nitrate burn barrels inside the walls so that we could create a wall of flame, because we didn't know who we were going to deal with. We weren't, I don't think any of the Marines were concerned about having to fight the NVA. What we were concerned about is having to fight the South Vietnamese military. And because there were already units who had deserted in the north, were coming back to Saigon. They were armed, they were mad as hell, and we thought literally we might have to shoot our way out of there.
The first thing I did was to go to the ambassador's office, and he was on his knees. He was on his knees pawing through classified documents. And I got down, I said, "Mr. Ambassador, can I help you?" And he just sort of brushed me away. Well, what he was doing was trying to locate his most sensitive intelligence files, which hadn't been destroyed yet.
While the embassy's evacuation plan called for putting most of the embassy staffers in buses and taking them out to Tan Son Nhut Air Base for evacuation, and that the ambassador and a small inner circle would leave by helicopter from the roof, somehow over the past 3 days or 4 days, 1,500 to 2,000 Vietnamese, Americans, third country nationals, and others who wanted out had decided that the embassy was the place to be in order to guarantee rescue. And so the embassy compound was literally teeming with people who had not been planned on.